Hey, there was a lady named Sharon that was at work one day. And as she was at work every day, but this time she was at work this particular day. So she was at work, and they had a party for someone, a birthday party. And she's been staying away from it. She's been staying away from the birthday parties, the office parties, anything that has food and cakes and desserts. She's been staying away, but because it's a birthday party for one of her friends, she walked into the room where they were having the party at her office. She looked around at the amazing trays of food, and especially the sweets, the cakes, the cupcakes, all the desserts that was there and prepared for this birthday and this celebration. She came in and she had that typical response of "Happy birthday," and I'm glad that you're having another year to celebrate. And she's all like, rejoicing with them. But then she says, "But I have to leave. I have to get out of here." She turns and she walks away, and everybody understands at the office because it's different for her. But she's not eating sweets, and to be in that room was just too much to handle, especially doing this every day. We can't understand that. You ever been on a diet? It's like you just can't go near food. I mean, the food that you cannot have. When I'm on a no-carb diet, for example, spaghetti and breads just sound so good to me. But then if I'm on a low-fat diet, all of a sudden, all these other foods sound good to me. So it's whatever you can't have is really what you want. So Sharon was in that place where she's not eating any sugars. And she stayed away from all sweets. Now she says, that, you know what? She wasn't on a diet. And it wasn't for her health. She said that there's something interesting about why she's doing it. Well, for one, over the years, she's had a son named Josh growing up. And her son named Josh, that just didn't even sound right. Her son named Josh. I said that twice. Her son Josh, how about that? Her son Josh was growing up, and somewhere in his early teen years, he began to test out these different ways of life, and one of them was smoking marijuana. Whenever they found out, her and her husband found out about Josh doing this, everybody told her the same exact thing. He's a teenager now. He's just experimenting. Everything's going to be okay. So they talked to Josh about it, hoped that he would understand and change. But all he did was get better at hiding it. They didn't really understand how bad it got until years later when Sharon's really busy going to work. She goes and drops Josh off for school, and then she goes to work, and then this continues every day. But finally the school calls, and it talks to Sharon and says, "Your son hasn't been in school for 5 days now, and we just want to know if everything's okay." Sharon's like, "I'd drop him off to school. I know he goes." Well, no, he doesn't. Josh has found out that he can make it appear like to his mom that he's going to school, but he can actually go off with his friends, and now beyond marijuana, now he's into LSD, ecstasy, and all these other drugs in his life. In fact, now that the more that Sharon has found out about her son, she's found out that he is the guy to go to whenever you really want to party. He's the guy to go to get supplied with all the things that you would want to have one of these high school parties and supply all the drugs and everything that you need. Not only was he into drugs, he was into alcohol. He was living a life that was so hidden from his mom and dad. And Sharon says, "I was raised in a Christian home. I didn't know what all these technical terms for drugs and the way that kids use drugs. She didn't know that the holes in the bottom of a soda can was the way that they would use it for the drugs." And she says, "I didn't know all these things that I saw around the house." She goes, "I was just naive to knowing that this was part of the drug paraphernalia. I could have caught him earlier had I known." She says, but Josh was so far advanced that in this addiction that he had, that there was no talking through it. He actually needed to go to rehab. He actually needed to go to where someone could help him and cut him off from these drugs. And they put him in programs. They sent him to counselors. They put him in programs. And sure enough, he would be good for a week or two. And then he would fall right back out into the world and start doing drugs again and get high. And I got to the point where he overdosed on cocaine and LSD and all these things. He's overdosed more times than she wants to remember. She says it was a continual thing of how much he got into drugs and how much he was going to the hospitals, going to rehab, overdosing, going back into different lifestyle changes, going back and forth. It was like being on a roller coaster ride. You're hoping this is the time that he gets better, but it's not. It's a big failure. And the counselors actually said, addiction is actually a disease of relapse, where you start to do good, then you relapse and go back. So this disease of relapse, it's just a continual thing. Before a person gets better, they'll continually relapse. Josh finally was so bad that his mom just didn't know what to do. Said, I understand why my daughter-in-law divorced him. I understand. She had to protect herself and also their child. I understand why she left him. I understand why my daughters don't want anything to do with their brother. I understand that. Sharon says, I've actually talked to Josh myself and said, I love you, but I don't like who you are. She says it's this line that you finally have to draw between this is your family, but yet they're so far gone that you can't trust them. He says, Josh couldn't be trusted. Not only did he borrow money from me, but he also stole money from me. And he stole anything in the house that he could get his hands on to go out and supply what he needed. She said, but in January, she goes, it had to be God. It had to be. She said, God must have given me this idea. But she said it was an idea, kind of like a vision. But it was so big, it was so different, it was so weird. She said that I knew it had to be from God. She said, I am not going to eat any sugar until my son has been 365 days clean. That's why she can't go to the office with all the office parties and go in there, because she's going to make sure that she does not eat sugar, anything with sugar in it, until he is clean. We call that fasting. In biblical terms, it's called fasting, and it's when you pray, you fast. And throughout the Bible, we see more scripture about it. We don't talk about it a lot, but fasting is when you maybe don't eat food for a certain amount of time, and sometimes it's don't eat food and don't drink water for a certain amount of times. No, we don't say do it more than too long, because your body needs food and water especially. But there is a time that you would fast. And she feels like God had told her to fast for her son. And this was something that she says it was so weird. It was between her and God. She says this is something that she didn't tell Josh, she didn't tell anybody else, and she just went around and did this. Even though the office knew that she wasn't eating sweets, they didn't know why. They thought she was trying to lose weight. So whenever she would go to these parties, she said it became the hardest thing, because right after January, you can make it for a while, but then there's that whole Valentine's thing, where everybody in the office is bringing in chocolate, one of her favorites. And they would bring in chocolates and sit them at her desk. It's like the temptation is right there. She said, man, it's the hardest thing to do. And you don't want to be rude and tell people, no, I can't have it. I mean, you would at least eat a little bit because it's a gift. But then no, she finally started giving it all away. And she said she continued to do this because there was a desire in her heart to stick with this until her son is clean and sober. And then it happened. Her daughter's going to get married. And her daughter goes, "Come on, Mom. I want you to come down and see and meet the person who is making the desserts and the cake." They went there, and it was a place that was so beautiful. It had cakes and cupcakes and desserts everywhere. And the cake maker comes out and says, "Why don't you try one of these? And try one of these? And try one of these?" She says, "There was all kinds." And then those ugly words came out. And this one has cream-filled cake. And it was this perfect one. She looked at it and she's like, "Oh my, it's too good. I can't say no." And she said, only for this reason am I going to try it. And she finally took a small piece of that cream-filled cake because she said, "I do need to know what the guest of the wedding will be eating. And I need to know that we're serving something good." And she took that bite of that cake, and the guilt, the feeling, she said, was just, she failed. She completely failed at fasting for this time period that her son could be sober, clean and sober for 1 year. The disappointing part was, after she began this fast back in January, she truly believed that February 18th, when her son checked himself into a hospital to get better, he began in the rehab classes, the group where they began to help him. She truly believed that in February of that year, that was a sign from God saying, "You began your fast, and I'm going to bless it because your son is signed up and going to rehab." But now the guilt in her was too much, and she started feeling like, I am a failure for my son. First of all, I want to talk to you about fasting and what that means. Fasting is, there's no power in fasting. It's not like the magic token for when you fast. That's the thing that God's been missing. If you would have fasted, it would have happened. If you would have fasted, that's why He's not answering your prayers, right? No, the fasting has no magical power. But there is something powerful about fasting. And I suggest that we do it. I suggest that you do it within your own relationship with Christ, and that you do it on your terms, with Christ's terms, and you work out the way that you fast, when you fast, and how you fast. But let me tell you what it clearly would mean today. Now, there's times in the Old Testament where it talked about fasting, and that's okay, but we seldom go by what they did in the Old Testament because we're under a new covenant. So why in this new covenant would I fast? The one reason I tell people is because Jesus fasted. Jesus was led by the Holy Spirit. And that's in Matthew 14, 1 through 4. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and 40 nights, that's crazy. I don't suggest you guys do that unless God really put it on your heart and make sure it's from God, because that's just a long time. But there is something to me that told me, why would Jesus fast? And then whenever you read about the disciples in the book of Acts, chapter 14, 23, whenever they did, fasting's mentioned a few times in the Bible, but this one, when they had appointed elders for them in every church, having prayed with fasting. See, before they appointed elders, before they did something big, they would pray and fast. It doesn't say how long they fasted. So you don't have to fast for all the time for long periods of time, but there's a time that you would pray and fast, that you would deprive yourself of food or water or drink for at least some period of time. So then I see something that's important to me when I read this, and it says, fasting seems to come when you're doing something that you really want to hear clearly from God, and you want to make sure that you're in the right mindset, the right mold around you. So here's what I found out. When I fast, I pay attention to God, and I pray more often. I read my Bible more intently. I read it to see what it says. I'm seeking something. And because I'm depriving myself of food or water or whatever I'm holding back on, whatever the fast is, I found out that I become more adamant about getting an answer from God. I find out that I'm seeking God so much. Why? Because I'm in focus, I'm in tune, because there's something that I'm giving up for this. I'm paying a price in a sense. Now I want to stop right there because I don't want anybody to think that God is expecting you to pay for anything. Your prayers aren't answered because of your works, in the sacrifices that you do. God listens to our prayers, hears our prayers, and He has mercy and grace for us, and He'll answer our prayers. But there is something, a benefit to us when we invest in it. And you can hear that term a lot even in today's worldly society. If you put money into it, you're more intent to get the most out of it. So the same thing with your prayer. If you're investing something in it, you're withholding something that you love, and you're saying, I'm not going to touch any of that until I hear from God, until my prayer is answered. All of a sudden, you have something invested in it, and man, you're going to pray, you're going to seek God's will, you're going to read His Word, you're going to listen for Him to speak to you. All of a sudden, the world becomes a communication between you and God, and that's what you want to continue to stick with. It's that clear communication. Fasting is not something that's going to make God move any faster or slower. What it's doing is it's opening it up so that when He does something, you are clearly going to be able to see it was from God. You have spent time in prayer. You have spent time fasting. You have spent time reading His Word. You have spent time in this, and He's going to show you the rewards from this. As in whenever the disciples would anoint the elders or send the elders off, open a church, or when they were seeking from God, they would fast. Deprive themselves of food or water for a certain amount of time. To say, God, we're in this. We're part of this. This is part of our ministry. We want to hear from you, and we want you to know that we're as serious about this, because if I'll give up food, I'm in it. I'm serious about it. That's why whenever I tell people, whenever they pray, how long did you pray? It's not the length of your prayer that makes God answer your prayers, but man, if you really want what's in your heart, then you'll shout it out to God. If you really want things to happen in your life, you're going to not only seek God with your words, but you're going to start doing things that He wants and He requires out of you. But one of those things is, it's not a requirement. It's just saying, God, I want to show you. I want to show you I'm in this. And I'm willing to sacrifice something. I'm willing to put something aside. And that's food. That's maybe it's watching TV. Some people, we've gotten to that these days. We depend on our iPhones and iPads and TV so much that now we're saying, you know what? I'll do without that for a day. Everybody's about to pass out. I see that look. But you know what? Right now, that truly is a sacrifice. That is something to say, hey, I won't answer the phone all day long. That'll be great for some people, though. But you know that it's that fasting that the Bible talks about, but don't take it too far. It's not the magic ingredient. It's the ingredient of prayer and fasting together that just opens your mind and heart to communicating with God, that just keeps it so clear that you're like, God, thank you for hearing me, and I hear you clearly too. Your focus every day is reminded. For instance, if you're staying away from food, and that's your fast, and you're staying away from food, let me tell you, every time your stomach growls, why? It's reminding you it's time to pray. Every time that Sharon looked at a donut or a cake or anything with sugar in it, she would be reminded that her son is living a life that is captured by drugs and alcohol and addictions and things he couldn't get out of, and she needed to go and pray. It was that continual reminder every time that she saw anything that she loved to say, hey, wait, I need to pray for my son. So whenever you're fasting, those times that your stomach is hurting and you're thinking, oh man, I wish I could eat what they're eating, or I wish that I could, for instance, if you're not having food or water for a while, you know what? You start getting thirsty pretty quick. Man, every time those urges to eat or drink come on, you just say, this is time to pray. It's time to pray for the thing that I'm fasting for. It's time to show God one more time that I'm still in this thing. Now, it's nothing by my power. It's not by my might that anything spectacular is going to happen. But that's not what God has been trying to tell us from the very beginning. It's not about us. It's about Him. But the one thing that people always ask me, in fact, we got it on Facebook this week and on YouTube, it's why do we believe in God? Why do I believe in God? Because I pray to the God that hears me and He answers me, and it's so real. How can I not believe in God? So while I'm fasting and I'm praying and I see the work of God right before my eyes and in my own life, what is God doing? God's saying, we're in this together. I'm the creator. You are the creation. But I love you so much that I want you to be part of this. We call that a relationship. It's a relationship that He's created between the creation and the Creator, and He lets us be involved. That's why prayer and reading the Bible is so important. But fasting is another ingredient that just brings you closer to God. Sharon said she finally wrote a letter to her son who's in the rehab, and said, I want to let you know something. Since January, I have been avoiding sugar for the fact of fasting for you until you're clean and sober for 365 days. He called her on the phone. He called her back when he got that letter. And he says, those are the best words I've ever heard, ever read. And she goes, but I caved. Because she had said, I ate the cake. She had told him about the temptation was so great and it was for the wedding. And he goes, but Mom, that's what I go through all the time. It's a disease of continual relapse until you get it right. She said, when God called her to fast in January, she said, I thought the fasting was for my son. I thought that I was fasting so that I would pray and God would answer my prayers about my son. But what God was showing me is you stay away from something that you love, and you'll see how hard it is for Him to stay away from something that He loves. You stay away from those sweets and those sugars, and you see how every day you're tempted. Every time you go to your office and those sweets and that sugar, those donuts, those candies, all those things that people give you, they're just handing you. She says, now I understand that God was showing me every day of His life. He's tempted by drugs. He's tempted by alcohol. His friends want to just give him more and give him more. Every time he goes out of his house and goes down the street, somebody sees him and says, hey, come to a party. Every day he is fighting this addiction. And that's why he goes down. That's why he loses it, because once he's out there and he's so strong, but he gets hit so hard, and then he caves. She said February 18th of 2011, they celebrated with a cake his 365th day of being clean and sober. Together, they went in and ate a chocolate cake to celebrate that day. When she wrote this article, she says, this February 18th, we're celebrating 5 years of him being clean and sober. The miracle was not just in the cleansing that he received. Josh is on a way to recovery and doing well. But it was that time that God spent with Sharon and said, all these years you've been trying to change him, but you don't know what you're trying to change. When you pray to God and you're asking him, oh, help these people, let God place you in a position that you understand what they're going through. And your prayers will get more intense when you understand where they're coming from. God has heard Sharon's prayers for years about her son. But she never understood really what he was going through. And God just put her in a place. Obviously, totally opposite situations. But in a place where she had to say no. And she had to stop. But yet at that point, when she heard that from her son, saying, that's what I've been going through. That was God clearly speaking to her and said, now, pray for your son now. Pray for your son with that heartfelt desire to understand what he's going through and how hard it is. Don't give up on him when he goes from a high to a low. When he collapses, when he gets overtaken by this sin and this disease. Don't give up on him. Keep praying for him because you know what he's going through now. And to know after 5 years and continually going, what a testimony of a mother who loved her son so much. And even more so, once God revealed to her what he was going through and the struggles and the hard times that he was trying to be freed from this. But the temptations are strong. Satan is awful. He's trying to rip us all apart. Don't downplay it. He's trying to take us all and give us a miserable life. God wants the best for us. But also see the positive. God knows what you're going through. He knows the struggles. He knows how hard it is. So whenever you pray to God, don't say, God, I failed again. Say, God, thank you for having grace and mercy on me to give me another chance.